So many people are kind of stuck at home right now, and if you're looking for something to do, something that'll help pass the time, that'll teach you a new skill or a new hobby, while at the same time providing fresh, gourmet, organic food, something you might want to look into is learning how to grow mushrooms at home. Now there's lots of different ways that you can grow mushrooms on a small scale at home, all the way from super simple methods that require no special tools or equipment whatsoever, all the way up to more complex methods that might have better results but require more significant investment. The best part, however, is that no matter where you start, there's no limit to how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. Growing mushrooms really is one of these hobbies where there's always the opportunity to learn something new and to do something new. So in this video, I wanted to give you kind of a broad overview of the different ways you can get started growing mushrooms at home so you can decide where you want to start and hopefully inspire you to start growing your own gourmet organic mushrooms from the comfort of your own home. If you've never ever grown mushrooms before, then maybe the best place to start is a ready-to-go mushroom growing kit. This will allow you to grow fresh mushrooms with no experience whatsoever, while at the same time kind of teaching you what it is that mushrooms need to thrive, and also teaching you a little bit about how the mushroom life cycle works. This way you can decide if growing mushrooms at home is something that's worth your time without spending too much money getting started. So a mushroom growing kit is basically just a mushroom fruiting block that has already been colonized by mushroom mycelium and is ready to fruit mushrooms out of the box. They're usually a bit smaller, but other than that, they're really no different than what commercial mushroom growers use to grow gourmet mushrooms at scale. With a mushroom growing kit, most of the hard work has already been done for you, and you can simply just take it out of the box, cut it open, keep it humid, keep it in those conditions that mushrooms like to grow, and eventually you'll grow some mushrooms. So here is an example of one of these mushroom growing kits. This one's from Back to Roots. Now, I'm not affiliated with this company or anything, but I have used these kits before and they do work. So let's open it up and kind of take a look. So in this box, you have a little spray bottle, which you don't really need. You can just use a normal spray bottle. You got the instructions on how to use your kit, and here is basically the whole thing. This is a mushroom growing kit, and as you can see, like I said, it's basically just a mushroom fruiting block that has already been fully colonized. So this white stuff is just mushroom mycelium that's completely colonized the substrate that's inside of this bag, which is likely hardwood sawdust or something similar to that, maybe coconut husk or something that the mushrooms like to grow on. This particular kit is pearl oyster mushrooms, but you can get mushroom growing kits in pink oyster mushrooms, all different types of mushrooms, even lion's mane. But oyster mushrooms in particular are pretty beginner friendly, they're easy to grow, and they're a great option for people getting started growing mushrooms for their first time. So if you wanted to follow the instructions that come with the kit, basically all you got to do is cut an X on the top of the block to kind of reveal the mycelium, scrape off some of that mycelium that's already there, and then rehydrate it by soaking it overnight. And this is going to rehydrate the block, but also kind of initiate pinning or tell the mushrooms that it's time to start growing. After you soak it overnight, you can just kind of put it back in the box, cut the cardboard out the front to give the mushrooms space to grow, and just leave it in a part of your house that's kind of humid, that has some indirect, maybe diffuse light, and that'll allow the mushrooms to grow. And just spraying it every once in a while to make sure that it stays humid and make sure that it doesn't dry out. Now, the success of a kit like this kind of depends on your climate or where you live, because if you live somewhere that's super humid, you might not have an issue at all just growing this on your counter or in your kitchen or wherever. But if you live in a climate that's super dry, the mushrooms might not grow as much, or they might not grow at all if the block dries out too much. Because like I said, mushrooms require lots of humidity and fresh air in order to grow properly. So if you want to kind of cheat the system and create your own mushroom fruiting environment, there's a super easy way to do that as well. And that's what's behind me right here. This is a shotgun fruiting chamber, but it's basically just a fruiting chamber that's going to keep the mushrooms humid and also keep a lot of fresh air circulating so you can grow nice gourmet mushrooms. So another option to do that would be to do the same process, cut a slit in the bag, hydrate it, but instead of putting it back in the box and just putting it somewhere in your house, you can put it in this shotgun fruiting chamber. So all this is a clear tote with a lid, and I've gone ahead and drilled 1/4-inch holes throughout this whole thing, on top of the lid, all over the side, and then on the bottom as well, about every 2 inches, 1/4-inch holes. And then we've soaked some perlite Perlite is like a mineral that kind of absorbs water and then gives it off slowly over time. So we soak some perlite in water and then put the bottom couple inches of this terrarium or fruiting chamber, covered it in perlite. And basically what that does is creates a really nice humid environment, while at the same time providing fresh air exchange because of all the holes, and light because the tote is clear. So yeah, I'm gonna do this in another video because I kind of want to do this real time, but basically cut a slit in the fruiting block, soak it in water, then put it in this shotgun fruiting chamber that kind of provides the right conditions of humidity and fresh air to be able to grow some really nice gourmet mushrooms. But for most people, you'll also have a lot of success with a kit if you just simply kind of leave it on a counter, and make sure you're spraying it to keep that surface of the block humid and to keep the mushrooms humid as they grow. So yeah, this is by far the easiest way to get started growing mushrooms at home. They're pretty inexpensive and you can get them all over the place online. I got this one on Amazon, but you know, there's lots of different options, lots of different species, and it doesn't really get any easier than that. So if you're comfortable with the idea of growing mushrooms from a kit and want to go a little deeper and open up your horizons a little bit, the next level is growing mushrooms from pre-made spawn. This really opens up your horizons because you're no longer limited to what you can get in a mushroom growing kit. Pre-made commercial grain spawn comes in a whole wide variety of different species, and you can use it to grow mushrooms in a bunch of different ways. Spawn can kind of be thought of as like the seeds of the mushrooms, though really that's not technically correct at all. What spawn is usually sterilized grain that's been inoculated with a mushroom culture, and the mycelium has kind of worked its way all the way through that grain, making individualized grains covered in mushroom mycelium. This spawn can then be added to another substrate where it will continue to grow and eventually fruit mushrooms. So here you can see some mushroom grain spawn that's just getting started. This is sterilized rye grain that's been inoculated with mushroom culture. In this case, it's king oyster mushroom. And you can see that the mycelium is starting to work its way all over those grains. And eventually the mycelium will work its way throughout this entire jar, and all of these individual grains will be covered in mushroom mycelium. Now, the great part about mushroom grain spawn is once it is fully colonized, it's relatively resistant to contamination. So, you know, that's why you can leave it up to someone else to prepare the grain spawn by pre-made commercial grain spawn that's already been completely colonized. And then you can use that to add it to another substrate to grow your mushrooms, and you don't have to worry as much about contamination. So if you want to see some ways that you can use pre-made grain spawn to grow lots and lots of mushrooms at home, we have one video where we grew blue oyster mushrooms in a 5-gallon bucket. And this method was super simple. It's just a 5-gallon bucket and some pasteurized wood chips with the grain spawn, and you know, the mushrooms grow outside of the bucket. There's another method where you can just lay straw down in layers and add the grain spawn and then straw and grain spawn and straw in these layers, and cover it in a poly sheet and grow lots and lots of oyster mushrooms over the period of a couple months outside in your backyard. So there's lots of different ways that you can use grain spawn to grow mushrooms, lots of different low-tech methods that are easily accessible. So yeah, it's a great option for people who want to get started and want to grow more mushrooms than you could if you were using a kit. So if you've successfully grown mushrooms from a kit and you've mastered the art of growing mushrooms using pre-made spawn, it might be time to dig a little deeper, go a little bit deeper into mushroom cultivation, and learn how to manage cultures and actually make your own grain spawn. Now, this does require some specialized equipment like a pressure cooker or a pressure canner or autoclave, and quite possibly even a laminar flow hood. But once you have these things, once you have a mushroom lab kind of set up, there's really no limit into what you can do in terms of managing cultures, making your own grain spawn, making all sorts of fruiting blocks, and really doing anything you want with mycology and with growing mushrooms. So let's hop into an at-home mushroom lab real quick, and I can show you some of these pieces of equipment and some of the things that you might need in order to set up your very own mushroom lab at home. So here we are at kind of a makeshift at-home mycology lab, and the cornerstone of this whole operation is this big piece of equipment behind me. And basically what this is a big fan on top of a filter, and when you turn it on, that fan will blow air through this filter, and any of the air that's coming through here will be like 99.99% clean, so you can do all sorts of sterile work in front of this hood without worrying about contamination. So you might be wondering, what kind of stuff can you actually do in front of a laminar flow hood? And it's basically anything that requires sterile air or a sterile environment that you need to do in order to grow mushrooms. These are things like culture transfers from one petri dish to another petri dish. This is things like making liquid culture, making your own grain spawn by adding a wedge of mushroom mycelium to sterilize grain, inoculating fruiting blocks by adding, fully colonized grain to sterilized sawdust and bran in order to actually make your own fruiting blocks instead of, buying mushrooms from a kit. So, basically anything that you'd want to do that requires a sterile environment, you can do in front of this flow hood. And it really just makes things way less cumbersome and opens up all sorts of possibilities for what you can do. Now, of course, a lot of the work that's done in front of the flow hood, other than inoculating blocks and inoculating grain spawn, is just managing cultures. So if you are, start to use petri dishes and do agar work, you can get cultures and you can store cultures and you can transfer cultures and you can keep them for a really long period of time. So you can always have a bank to go back to. So for example, if you wanted to grow reishi mushrooms, you could just reach into your fridge, grab the reishi mushroom, make your own grain spawn, and eventually grow reishi mushrooms. So the possibilities really are limitless. You can build up your own culture bank and you can start making all sorts of interesting mushroom projects. Now, of course, you don't 100% need a laminar flow hood. You can still do a lot of this sterile work in something that's called a still air box, which is basically just a clear tote with two big holes in it that you can stick your hands through and do a lot of the work inside of there. And, chances are you're still going to have very minimal contamination, but it's pretty cumbersome to do it inside of a box. Having a laminar flow hood is just so easy and so simple and allows you to do a lot more stuff a lot more freely. So another critical piece of equipment that you'll want to have for an at-home mycology lab is a pressure cooker or pressure canner, or like this autoclave here. And basically it's just a way to sterilize your grain or sterilize your substrates in order to actually make grain spawn or fruiting blocks. You see, mushroom mycelium likes very similar environments as molds and other fungi and bacteria, and these are things that are kind of naturally in things like grain and things like bran. So before you add the mushroom mycelium to it, before you add the liquid culture, before you add the agar wedges, you first need to sterilize it so that the mushrooms have a chance to grow and the bacteria, fungi, and other molds don't have a chance to grow. So a pressure cooker will allow you to, put in your grain spawn, for example, sterilize it for a couple hours at high pressure and high temperature, kill off all those competing spores, competing contaminants, and then when it cools down, you're able to add the mushroom mycelium and make grain spawn or make that fruiting block. So this really is a critical piece of equipment, especially for making your own grain spawn, because if you just try to do it at atmospheric temperature without the pressure aspect of it, it wouldn't get hot enough to actually kill off all those competing organisms, and chances are any grain spawn that you tried to make would end up getting contaminated relatively quickly. Now, you don't need something quite as heavy duty as this. There's much cheaper pressure canners that you can get for like less than $100 on Amazon that you can just use on your stovetop, that will quite easily sterilize grain and sterilize your fruiting blocks. So yeah, this one's probably overkill for most people just to have a mycology lab at home. But a pressure canner in general is a pretty critical piece of equipment to have, even more important than the laminar flow hood if you want to start growing lots of mushrooms at home. If you are interested in more equipment and more stuff that you might need to set up a mushroom grow lab at home, then you can check out this video where I go through all this equipment in a little bit more depth, and you can see what you might need to set one up of your own. So that's it. That's kind of how I like to think about growing mushrooms at home in 3 different levels, all the way from super simple methods up to more complicated methods like having your own mushroom lab and having limitless possibilities. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something new and maybe you're inspired to grow mushrooms. I'm actually going to be growing that mushroom kit that I showed at the start of the video, but that's going to take a couple weeks. So I'm going to be doing a video probably 2 weeks from now to show you how that kit actually turned out and how easy it is to grow mushrooms from a kit. And if you want to see that, or if you're just interested in mushrooms in general, feel free to subscribe, where we do weekly videos like this, weekly videos on the magic of mushrooms. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'm Tony from Fresh Cat Mushrooms, and we'll see you in the next one.